Welcome to Module 2. We're going to be talking about assessment.
So, before assessment, let's talk about rationale for integrating spirituality. So why do we need spirituality? So there is actually a lot of good reasons for that, and one of the most important factors is that there's a reality. Many people use spirituality or religion in their daily lives. So, for example, according to resources, 80% of psychiatric patients report that they use spirituality or religion in their daily life to cope with their stress. And it's clearly accepted that spirituality and religion takes part in our lives, in all domains of our lives, like family structures, economy, politics, and health. So religion and spirituality has great impact on these areas, right? We cannot deny that. And we cannot separate this reality from using interventions or techniques in our practice. Psychotherapy has recently adopted a holistic approach, biopsychosocial approach. Social aspects includes culture, and culture includes religion. So it's the part of life, and we need to integrate it for sure.
Well, it's true that every culture has its own religion, right? Which may or may not be a part of the client's life, right? So it really just depends. It's hard not to make an assumption, right? That when it is that you see someone or you hear that they're from this culture, that you're going to then say, oh, then it's to do with this religion, right?
And also, we live in such a rapid lifestyle in our time, and people neglect to stop and think what they are going through, and they don't realize that they have mental breakdown until they come to that last point, right? So they have difficulty to make meaning about what they are passing through, about the difficulties.
Especially sometimes in families, right, where it is that you're dealing with a first generation, let's just say Canadian, second generation Canadian. So the parents have come from a particular culture with perhaps a particular religious belief, and then come to Canada, and in Canada, the children are growing up perhaps with a completely different understanding, right, that has a tendency to create conflict within the household.
Especially if you see like societies that are more we culture versus like ours is more of an individual culture. There can even be conflict with that, you see, with like the first generation versus second generation.
Oh yes. Or even when it is that you're dealing with multi-faith relationships, right? Multi-faith, multicultural relationships as well. Different understanding in regards to parenting expectations or any expectations, right?
So, with Rogers, you learned that person-centered approach. The reason for this is everybody is experiencing all these things individually, they personally, according to their perceptions, their own capacities. So, spirituality makes a deep understanding of their experiences. So there are some components that cannot be measured by the tools that so-called positivistic science can measure, like hope, inspiration, love. So these experiences cannot be measured by evidence-based techniques. Right? So spiritually integrated psychotherapy helps to understand how much or in what way we experience all these components.
Yeah, so as far as assessment goes, we're continually as counselors or counselors in training for some of us, assessing and just where the client is headed, and how progress is being made. So that needs to be considered in a spiritual term as well. So just assessing the relational approach, the encounter that the client has with their culture and engaging them in the healing process, just understanding the client's experience on a day-to-day basis and things that they've been through, just giving the client the opportunity to express what their values, their beliefs, and what that means to them and how it impacts the way they see themselves, the way they see others, and the way they see the world as well. And just allowing the client to have just the freedom to express themselves emotionally, and just to help you understand where they're at and what's meaningful to them. So that involves allowing the client to share concerns, fears, hopes and dreams, and just that creative expression. And we're sitting here in an art institute, which is an awesome place to be able to express just your creativity and artistic expression. So, and just understanding the role relationships play and how spirituality affects that. Just their view of perhaps God, of themselves, and of others. And so just understanding the identity of the client. Okay, so religion, again, spirituality can offer a sense of meaning and put things into perspective for clients and each of us, really. It provides moral and ethical guidelines that people need to follow or would like to follow, and it also provides, whether it's being part of a religious or spiritual community, that social support and emotional support as well. And it can provide strength, comfort in difficult times, challenging times, whether it's death, the loss of someone, or illness, or just difficult challenges that we all face. And it can foster healing and a sense of just well-being, overall well-being. So it's a really important thing to consider and to allow clients to express.
Mm-hmm.
So assessing by life story is really actually very important, right? Because it is about where it is the client has come from, right? What it is that they learned when it was that they were young, and then what it is that they've learned as it is that they've progressed through life. Right? And assessing actually really can be in a positive way. So the spirituality can actually really be positive, helpful, supportive, but it also can go the opposite way, right? So wherever it is that they came from might be a really great basis, or it actually really might have undermined who it is that they are, right? As it is that they've progressed. So it's really good in regards to assessment to be able to identify that, right? Where did things perhaps go awry? Where is it that things actually really changed from being helpful and supportive to perhaps constraining and confining, right? So identifying worldview, theological belief system, which is to do with God, right? Or whatever it is that their belief system actually really is really, really important, right? And, talking about art, I mean, the one thing about art is that art is filled with symbols, right? Color has great meaning, right? Movement has great meaning, right? And so when it is that you're looking at art, you're actually really creating a story in your mind. So you have your life story, you have the symbols that you've grown up with that are important to you, and that can actually really be used to be a helpful and supportive tool in order to be able to move forward. Stories are filled with metaphors as well, which give great meaning, right? So that you can use story to be able to then identify, well, what does that mean to you when it is that you hear this story, right? And of course, relationships, right? Relationships are really, really important. So of course, it's about the past, it's about the present, it's also about the future, right? To do with trauma, to do with spiritual distress, angst, that sort of thing, pain, grief, loss, especially in regards to any sort of risks to do with suicide, homicide, violence, abuse, either past, present, right, or fear in the future, and then just about monitoring risk. And then, of course, it's to do with the coping strategies, right? So what are those coping strategies that you can pull forward, pull out from story, experience, relationships, right? And all of those different components. Assess the faith process and development to do with, medication that might be impacting the client, right? And based upon actually really to do with spiritual belief or religious belief, it might be actually really something that is viewed as positive, but also too could be viewed as negative, right? Depending upon where it is that they've come from in that belief
So
system.
there are times you'll see like the religion go up and down, or the spirituality belief go up and down in their life.
Yeah.
Or some people come into it later in life. They didn't grow up with it, but it may be a factor.
Exactly.
Because something may have happened, and we have to really kind of look for that too.
So there are some people makes them go close to God or their spiritual living style when they have difficulty. On the other hand, there are people who go away from those values, spiritual values, and they have difficulties.
Yeah.
So in this point, spiritually integrating psychotherapy helps them to make that balance. And again, metaphors or religious figures would help them to get through their difficult situations. It can be a good coping strategy to remind them what would a religious figure would do in this case, right? And in terms of most severe cases like suicide or homicide, it can be preventive for them to use their religious values. For example, in some religious teachings, suicide is forbidden. In Islam, suicide is forbidden. And before I came across religious Muslim clients, I would never think that a Muslim person would never think about committing suicide. But now I started to see clients that really think of ending their lives. So we can remind them, what is your value? What is the place of committing suicide in your faith?
Yeah, and even sexuality can be viewed as a negative in some religions.
Yeah.
It's looked down upon, not allowed, and that can be a real conflict.
Or divorce.
Divorce too, yes.
Yeah.
So even getting like a spiritual timeline would be helpful with clients who've been doing that assessment. When did it kind of ebb and flow with the religion or spirituality? Because it can really show a lot just from a simple timeline.
Exactly. Because our values can be in conflict, right? So we can actually really have values that, at some point actually really start to then be in conflict, right? I value freedom, but I also value biblical teachings,
Yeah.
right? So
And
now,
they have dilemma.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So now I'm faced which one is most important to me based
And
upon the
it
situation.
is normal, and we are human beings, and we can feel that dilemma. So the therapist's role comes here, right, to remind the values to the client. who forget in living in those turmoils. They may forget their values, right? They may go away from their values. So it's our role to remind them. So is there like structured assessment model in spiritually integrated psychotherapy?
So one mnemonic we can use is FICA, F-I-C-A, and the F stands for faith and belief. And those things that help a client cope with different life challenges, with stress that comes up, and allows meaning in their lives. And so drawing on that. I is for importance, and that's the influence of belief on self-care. Like how do they view their spirituality or religious beliefs in terms of caring for themselves and in turn caring for others as well. And then the C is community, just that having that community of whether it's a religious community, having that shared faith and belief, or spiritual practices, that community as well. So that's really important in a client's life also. And the A is the address and care. So how should concerns be addressed in terms of someone who has those spiritual and religious beliefs? So, and how can they be integrated into treatment? And again, that takes exploring that on the part of the counselor and or psychotherapist and just evaluating that with the client and understanding the importance of that.
So this is a structured assessment technique.
Yeah, it serves as a nice reminder for what you want to include for counselors and therapists to remind us what we should be looking for.
All right, so moving on to the diagnostics, diagnostic variables in regards to assessment. So awareness of the holy, right? How do you actually really feel, I guess, or experience, right, the sacred? And that can be through those signs, symbols, right, that sort of thing. And so what is actually really sacred to the client, right? Providence, is there divine purpose, right? Purpose is so significant, right? Because purpose creates a sense of meaning. Lose your purpose, lose your sense of meaning, right? And then faith. Does the client actually really have any faith, right? And faith, generally speaking, meaning making, right? Behind whatever it is that might be, their strengths, right, or weaknesses, the things that are actually really, the things that are important to them, like for example, making money, right, or spending money on the other end, right? Everything can go awry, right? And then the question is, what is the belief in regards to that, right? Mm-hmm.
And again, it is the nature of our time. So this lifestyle teaches people how to live, what to do, what comes first. Like, I want bigger home, I want another car, I want a better career. So in the meantime, we forget what's meaningful, what's behind that, what is more important for us.
Yeah,
Right?
I think social media plays a large role in needing and wanting more because we see other people's lives, the positives, the great things, and we start comparing. And it really gets away from our value system.
That's so true. We're very I-centered, right? Very ego-centric. And so in regards to spirituality, it's about taking yourself out of yourself to realize that there are others, right? And that there is actually really a world, right? So there's other things at play. So spirituality can be both a resource and it also can be a struggle, right? So in regards to spirituality as meaning making, right, it creates a sense of depth, as well as when it is that difficulties happen, then it's easy to be able to look at tradition or scripture or meaning, right? Whatever it is that might be for the client to be able to get in touch with what that might be about, right? And so, of course, it creates a sense of guidance with no matter what it is that's happening, because there's something to look back on and reflect on.
Meaning making is really important, especially we talk about our time, materialistic time. We measure everything with visible criteria, so materialistic criteria, right? When people go in difficult times, when nothing works for them, they get lost. They feel mostly they say, "I feel empty. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense." When they
Why?
come, it doesn't make sense for them. Why it happens to me? Why are people like this? So they can't make meaning. So there is a writer, Viktor Frankl. He found the meaning even in the most difficult situation in his life, in concentration camp. Imagine the conditions, right? So if we draw on our spiritual values, religious values, it makes more sense. Meaning making in this sense is important to understand why it happened, why me, why people are like this.
Exactly. If you can understand the why, then you can live with the how.
Exactly.
So it gives existential answers to the problems, right? To conflicts, to whatever it is that might come your way, no matter how bad that might be, right? It draws attention to the limits of our power. The truth is, we're human. And I think a lot of the times people are very sad about that. We are not divine.
We make mistakes all the time.
Exactly. It's so true, right? We do not control how things play out. That's just so sad, but it's true.
It's true. Everyone thinks they can control everything in their life. And we have to learn what's in our control and what's outside of it.
Exactly, right? And I mean, seemingly unanswerable questions, right? There are big questions out there. And a lot of the times it gets people stuck because they just can't link their resources together in order to be able to make sense out of whatever it is that those big questions might be, right? So as it is that we age, another part of being human, life changes, right? And the coping skills that we actually really were, adopted at a certain time no longer might be viable for us, right? And so it's about changing our beliefs as it is that we age as well, right? So there needs to be movement that actually really happens simultaneously as it is that we come across difficult circumstances, right? Or things that we've never come across before in our lives, right? In order to be able to then link them together so that, again, life makes sense.
So this is the thing, when we have problem, we think we are stuck. There is no way out, because when everything goes well, we also think it will go forever. And we forget that there is change in life. And we think we are all going to be always superwoman, superman. So when we come across those terrible situations, and we got shocked. We don't know what to do. It's like getting out of water, like a fish, getting out of the water. Then we forget. We may have sudden loss. We may have sudden change in our lives, and our life gets upside down. And spirituality helps in this time, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so as much as it is that spirituality can actually really be a helpful resource, at times it can actually go the opposite way, right? So when you think about church, right? Church is a place where it is that people come together to support one another, right? And generally speaking, it's about becoming like Christ, Christ-like, right? And what happens a lot of the times is that when life does not go well, then of course it's not about perfection, and so people have a tendency to then no longer participate in church. They move away from church. Church too can be filled with conflict, right? A ton of conflict can go on in any institution, right? And so people lose their faith because in their minds they feel that that should be a place of peace.
Yeah, I call it reality gap. So they see that there is a huge gap between the reality and ideality. So for years and years they were taught you should be like this, you should be like that, like always honest, always. And they see people, religious figures, act against their faith, and they go away from the faith. They go away from their values. And they, of course, they struggle with their religious beliefs and values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, when it is that there's a place of suffering, loss, change, anything like that, right? I mean, it's a difficult place to be, and you know, a lot of the times what happens is that when it is that people have a strong faith, traditionally, in regards to doing good, when these bad things happen, death of a child, that sort of thing, it just does not make sense, right? And people have a tendency to then not be able to create that sense of meaning because the belief system is actually really, again, in regards to those different values, in conflict. Yeah. And of course there is spiritual abuse, right? Unfortunate situations that occur within the institution. Any institution can actually really happen, right? And so, you know, it can cause great loss and non-understanding as to what that might be about. Which can be a lifelong struggle. In regards to financial gain, you know, when I think about that, I think about, again, prosperity ministry, right, where it's all about financial gain. So talk about consolation, being close to God is when it is that you're actually really gaining financially, right? And if you're not able to do that, for whatever reason, something happens, right? Then unfortunately what happens is the blame has a tendency to be placed on the person, right? So when we think about The Secret, perhaps, right, in regards to New Age ministry, that what you send out is what you receive. Well, if you have cancer, then how does that work, right? And so then unfortunately what happens is, obviously you haven't prayed enough, obviously you sent out a bad thought, obviously, right? And so what's come back to you is that. So sometimes it can be the most, you know, hopeless scenario in order to be able to overcome that.
So this reminded me using spirituality or religion as a struggle when, as you said, when people have like severe illnesses or other calamity, they may think it's a punishment. So they may understand it from the negative side of spirituality or religion by forgetting that this word is causal word. So there may be other reasons. It may not be like punishment or other negative impact of religion or God's intervention.
And that can just deepen their distress. They're already dealing with this hardship, and now the distress of feeling like they have not held up their values, their religious beliefs, or that kind of thing. So that just compounds the problem and the issue.
And this increase their depression and anxiety. That's what's going to happen to me.
Yeah, so self-concept can be definitely influenced as well as life view, right, in regards to whatever it is that understanding might be, right? I remember being asked once, do you believe in miracles? And I said yes, because I've seen an embryo in a petri dish, and I can see it with my eye, and I saw it sparkle, right? I don't even need a microscope. And the prof at the time said, oh, that's nothing. He said, no, I mean miracles. I mean, if your hand gets cut off, will it grow back? And I was like, maybe not that much. Yeah, so of course it can be about magical thinking, right? That something miraculous is going to happen, right? All you have to do is believe enough, right? Yes. And so sometimes it can, actually really not be very helpful when it is that you have, and it doesn't actually really matter, right? Whether it's to do with religiosity or to do with spirituality. I mean, I've even had clients come in that have talked to a psychic, right? And the psychic has said, I have seen this. You are going to get into a car accident, right? And then all of a sudden they stop living because they're so afraid that they're going to die, right? And it's just like, oh, okay, well, was there a timeline on that? So let's just wait that out and see what happens, right? So it can come from any arena. Yeah, struggling with the divine is actually really something too. I think in regards to when bad things happened, being very angry at God, right? The positive thing about that is that there is actually really an outlet, right? Because if there is no outlet, then who is it that you would be angry at, right? It'll go internally. But I think that relationship is really important. Is God punishment, right? Or is God love, right? So it's hard to know. It's really good to be able to ask, right?
Yeah, it's good to explore what the client perspective in terms of God's intervention. So I heard somebody saying, what's the God's intervention if there is an accident on floor 1? And well, on the other hand, I heard also somebody, she was practicing Muslim, saying that, well, everything is in God's hand. This is what we are experiencing. It's nothing to do with our free will. So there's your free will then. And she, with that understanding, she rejects any kind of treatment, medication or other treatment interventions, believing that everything is in God's hands and I have nothing to do with that.
Interesting. Yeah. Or another one is God only gives you as much as you can handle. Right? And so what happens when it is that something happens that you actually really can't handle? Right? So it's interesting, right? Your relationship with the divine, God, with whatever it is that might be for you spiritually, it is really significant.
Targamant is the leader of spiritually integrated psychotherapy. He divides the relationship with God or spirituality into 3 parts. So for some people, there is no intervention, so you just go with this struggle by yourself. And some people leave everything to God, and He does whatever He decides or wishes. And the third part is collaborative relationship. So it goes hand in hand. So I do my best, I do whatever I can, and leave the rest to God, right? So this is like pretty precise way of seeing the things. So maybe we can ask the clients, how they see in integrating spirituality in their lives. Do they do it by themselves, or do they ask help from God, or do they just leave it all to God?
Very good.
Concept develops and gives rise to identity as a part of the construction of the larger self. Self-concept is defined as an idea of the self constructed from the belief one holds about oneself and the responses of others, while self is defined as the identity, character, or essential qualities of a person. Self-image is defined as one's concept of oneself and one's identity, worth, abilities, etc. The act of looking in a mirror, creating and examining a self-portrait provides access to the individual's sense of both self-concept and identity by depicting what can be seen and what resides within the subconscious. Here, two theories of self are explored: existential and authentic, and social self-construction. Argyll defined the existential self as the awareness by an individual of their authentic self, that which makes an individual separate and consistent. Also, that the individual's sense of self in social encounters affects their self-image because of the feedback they obtain from the reactions of others. And emphasized the importance of this socially based feedback, noting that it constructs the framework upon which identity develops. As such, the ever-evolving construction of the self depends upon the feedback the individual receives from the outside world. This determines the individual's way in which they see themselves and as well how satisfied they are with themselves. To investigate whether satisfaction with life is an indicator of personal judgment, Palacios and Carras, Fernandez, and Ortiz de Barón explored the relationships between personal self-concept and satisfaction with life. They note that the ways in which one sees oneself physically, academically, professionally, socially, and privately comprise an individual's self-concept. Their study addresses the four following dimensions of self-concept. The first dimension is self-fulfillment, or whether individuals have achieved their life goals. The second dimension is autonomy, which concerns whether individuals feel self-sufficient in their ability to make their own decisions and understand themselves to be equal yet different from others. The third dimension addresses honesty, or whether individuals see themselves as being trustworthy and honorable. The final dimension of self-concept concerns the ways in which individuals evaluate their emotional regulation. Concluding that satisfaction with life is an indicator of personal adjustment, the authors contend that personal adjustment reflects the extent to which people value their life positively and feel satisfied with what they have achieved in it. They indicate that the way the individual sees self has an impact on their self-image, self-concept, and sense of identity. Sandtrav suggests that identity refers to our self-portraits that develop over a lifetime and are made up of many components, including negotiations and affirmations of various roles and characteristics, not all of which are conscious to the individual. Berger and Lachman add, only a small part of the totality of human experiences is retained in consciousness. They suggest that experiences settle like sediment into memorable entities, adding that unless intersubjective sedimentation happens, individuals cannot make sense of their biographies of knowledge. They also observe that experiences shared with others who have similar biographies become incorporated in a common knowledge. They note that shared experiences are transmitted from one generation to the next by a linguistic sign system, adding that the sign system can also be transmitted through physical objects and actions, which serve as objective means to integrate new experiences into the existing knowledge base, affirming that reality is constructed not just individually, but in a social context. An art object, such as the self-portrait, can serve as a means to integrate new experience. The sociology of knowledge concerns itself with the social construction of reality. The development of the self takes place in an interrelationship with the individual's environment, and therefore the nature of the self is socially determined. The existence within the individual's consciousness of the generalized other enables the individual's acknowledged self-identity to attain stability and continuity. Interpretation of experience leads to authenticity. There is primary as well as secondary socialization processes. Primary socialization is a starting point of internalization, when the individual's interpretation of an objective event is experienced as expressing meaning and becomes subjectively meaningful to the individual. In secondary socialization, an internalized reality of the objective event and its previously established subjective meaning is already present because of primary socialization. The previously established meaning of the event stands in the way of making further additions to previous information, blocking the individual's opportunity to acquire new internalizations. This implies that the individual's experience of any reality that takes place after primary socialization is artificially modified by the process of secondary socialization. New realities to augment realities that have already been internalized through primary socialization, the new realities need to be brought home in a vivid, relevant, and interesting way that connects them to the knowledge already internalized by primary socialization. The new knowledge must be interesting enough for the individual to move away from the primary internalizations and accept the new artificial internalizations. When this occurs, the new realities become newly acquired knowledge, augmenting the individual's self-concept. This insight is important to the construction of the self as the individual self reflects. For example, connections can be made vivid with an art object, such as a self-portrait, allowing new insight to be adopted into new behavior. Rogers believes the self-concept is composed of self-image, self-esteem, and the ideal self. He divides self-image as the individual's view of self that does not necessarily reflect reality, and notes that it is comprised of several elements. The first element comprises the observable physical appearance of the individual. A second element concerns how the individual perceives their performance in social roles. Personality traits comprise another category of elements and include the individual's descriptions of how they perceive themselves. The ideal self is the person an individual would like to be, and states that the congruency exists when the ideal self and the actual experience of an individual are consistent. If there is inconsistency between an individual's self-image and their ideal self, the incongruence negatively affects the individual's sense of self-worth and self-esteem. This observation is relevant given that an individual's sense of self is based on the individual's image of self, which may or may not be congruent. Identity represents the objective reality within which the individual is situated in society. In a community where there is a simple division of labor and minimal distribution of knowledge, everyone's identity would be easily recognizable, both objectively and subjectively. As the distribution of knowledge becomes more complex, discrepancies occur in which hidden depths can be discovered within the self. A rupture can occur between the individual's visible conduct and invisible self-identification when a discrepancy occurs between appearance and reality in the individual's self-understanding. Discovering the existence of such discrepancies is a crucial element in the process of increasing self-understanding. Clarifying whether realities are conscious or visible, and whether they are unconscious or invisible, appears to be essential for strengthening cohesiveness within the self. The true self can only be revealed when self-understanding is achieved, by unearthing and exploring the differences between what is only appearance and what is reality for the self. When one thinks of appearance, one thinks of the body. When an individual looks like on the outside, and resulting bodily experience. Because everyone is a body and has a body, they experience self as an entity that is not identical with the body. Berger and Lechman state, in other words, man's experience of himself always hovers between being and having a body. Given that having a body is an important component of identity, an exploration of the body's role in self-reflection should be incorporated in any attempt to increase self-knowledge. The question of who an individual is can only be answered by incorporating both the internal and the external experiences that make up the self. Individual prompts the individual to ask, "Who am I?" noting that this question would not arise in a society with minimum knowledge. Only when individuals encounter others with hidden selves do they reflect and ask, "Who am I?" The author suggested this question as a result of a mirror effect that motivates the individual to ask self the questions they ask others and apply what they experience from others to self. They suggest that the individual continues to experience himself as an organism apart from and sometimes set against the socially derived objectifications of himself, contending that this dialectic can be a struggle between a higher social identity-related self and a lower pre-social or anti-social self. I suggested the back-and-forth movement of the mirror effect parallels the back-and-forth movement required to explore the self within the context of the creation, dialectic, and reflection about the self, especially for the art therapist. The construction of the self is in relation to others, and this relationship with self develops over a lifetime. As children, we begin to draw to communicate our experience and make sense of the world. We begin to construct ourselves through art. This section explores how, as adults, we continue to construct ourselves and make sense of the world, and how that process of self-construction is undergirded through art. Cederbaum discussed the ego as the I of the conscious part of the mind of both internal and external activity, while the self is made up of the inner subconscious part of the psyche. She describes that with the use of the artistic process, the supervising I of the superego is removed so that what was once subconscious can become conscious, allowing the individual the ability to begin to self-explore. The use of art allows the individual to attain the insight needed to clearly see the self. Lowenfield and Britton observed that drawings provide good indications of growth by depicting the individual's gradual progression from an egocentric point of view to awareness of self as part of a larger environment. They suggest that a positive self-concept ameliorates the individual's ability to learn, adding that drawings essentially contain representations of the self and his feelings. The authors discuss Matchover, who observed that individuals project their own personalities into their drawings of the self. From the drawings, the individuals can reflect on both internal and external dynamics. The act of self-portraiture reflects one's ability to face oneself. This activity may reveal developmental delays, noting that identifying such delays could greatly facilitate therapeutic changes in self-concept. One explanation for not using self-portraiture as a tool for assessing developmental delays is that most of us discontinue drawing between the ages of 12 and 17. Another reason might be that the artist associates drawing with an idealized time in the past or with a difficult time in which the individual remains stuck. Adults also bring their child self along with them into adulthood. As Erickson pointed out, adults need to be creative to generate and to struggle against stagnation. Dudney and Nicholas add, although adults develop qualities of the self and have different qualities and abilities from when they were children, they still have a child self. This child does not fade away with time, but rather plays a powerful role in the formation of the adult self. This describes the adult's need to generate as well as to integrate experience. Adult ego development makes psychosocial gains through intimate engagement in activities such as parenting. Erickson makes the important observation that such activities combine both ego-related and social aspects of the personality. They not only generate experiences, but also provide the opportunity to integrate experience with values accrued over the individual's lifetime. Being able to integrate experience is an important aspect of both personal and professional development. Discussing professional identities, he also described the individual's developmental need for opportunities for ego functions in spheres free from conflict, noting that professional responsibility of the therapist to include social, organizational, and cultural conditions in their therapeutic analysis of the client's situation. It is pertinent to note that this responsibility also applies when the therapist and client are the same individual. The adult's primary need is to identify, address, and work through personal issues to see self clearly and understand where they fit within the larger environmental context. This challenge adds extra responsibilities to the therapist's roster of efforts to maintain their professional identity. He/she must be able to create and integrate their personal experience while simultaneously working through the experiences generated by their ever-evolving professional identity. Constructivism compared with existentialism. Constructivism focuses on the many different selves incorporated in the process of being, accompanied by systematic doubt about theories regarding the nature of the self. Understands that reality is a construction of the person experiencing the reality. The self is a narrative. Personal identity is a partly invented story. The self is a construction with local characteristics, a socially constructed set of functions, attributes, and beliefs, and is witness to any self-experience. Self-awareness moves from problem-dominated stories to preferred stories of possible ways of experiencing reality and the self. A person is consciousness and participates in the construction of his/her own reality, which is only known through intersubjectivity. The client is a reflector, an observer of the self, who has been. Existentialism suggests that anxiety and uncertainty of being center on concerns regarding death, meaninglessness, isolation, and freedom. Emphasizes the first-person subjective, mental, and emotional state, experience over reflection, existence before essence, inwardness of being and being in the moment. The self is an entity with universal features, a substance of being, a universal given, a free and given being, an entity, and is present in the moment without reflection. The self has the potential for actualization, peak experience, self-realization, and higher stages of development. A person is an objectively knowable subject. The client is an experiencer of the self in the now. Man is a being with aspirations, hopes, and godlike qualities. The first thing that we're actually really going to be concentrating on is to do with developing your own counseling house. And here I actually have my own creation. So what I've done is I've brought together all of the different theories and modalities that are actually really my basis. I've put in here Freud and beyond, because the truth of the matter is about building upon and integrating all of the different theories and modalities, and there are so many, together in regards to being able to build, create, develop whatever it is that I might need. When I think about therapy, I always think about it as an artistic process. It's like looking up at the stars and seeing all of the stars and developing a way in which you decide, well, what are those key stars or key topics that we need to be concentrating on within the therapy setting? And once it is that you can clearly see them, then to be able to develop a roadmap between all of the different stars. Your case conceptualization in regards to what it is that you're going to pull from for your theories and modalities. And once it is that you can clearly see the roadmap, be able to identify what that constellation actually really is in order to be able to develop what you need to progress through your therapy session, to progress through therapy. So here I have, in my very, very artistic way, developed my own counseling house, my basis of being. And so for me, what it is, I've pulled together all the different components of what I've worked on in my experience as a practitioner. Approaches to art therapy, because of course I am an art therapist, and so as it is that we're working on that creativity, pulling together theory and practice of family therapy and counseling as a marriage and family therapist. And so growing and building upon those components. I also do, of course, trauma-informed interventions. That's a mainstay, using the AIP model and the principles and practices and bringing them all together to do with a modern psychoanalytic thought and, of course, the systems of psychotherapy and as a trans-theoretical analysis. So we're building upon constructivist as well as existentialist theories as well. So as you can see, this is what it is that my counseling house looks like. And what I'm going to be asking you to do is to take some time and actually really create your own counseling house. What are the theories, what are the modalities that you want to build upon in a creative manner? It's our creativity that is our sense of play. And it's important for us to engage in whatever it is that that might be for us in order to be able to maintain self-care. So, take some time, sit down, and actually really have a look at, well, what is it that are my predominant theories, my predominant modalities that I build upon and use within the therapy setting so that isomorphically you can actually really use them as it is that you begin your own self-supervision, self-reflective process. The first thing that we're actually really going to be concentrating on is to do with developing your own counseling house. And here I actually have my own creation. So what I've done is I've brought together all of the different theories and modalities that are actually really my basis. I've put in here Freud and beyond, because the truth of the matter is about building upon and integrating all of the different theories and modalities, and there are so many, together in regards to being able to build, create, develop whatever it is that I might need. When I think about therapy, I always think about it as an artistic process. It's like looking up at the stars and seeing all of the stars and developing a way in which you decide, well, what are those key stars or key topics that we need to be concentrating on within the therapy setting? And once it is that you can clearly see them, then to be able to develop a roadmap between all of the different stars. Your case conceptualization in regards to what it is that you're going to pull from for your theories and modalities. And once it is that you can clearly see the roadmap, be able to identify what that constellation actually really is in order to be able to develop what you need to progress through your therapy session, to progress through therapy. So here I have, in my very, very artistic way, developed my own counseling house, my basis of being. And so for me, what it is, I've pulled together all of the different components of what I've worked on in my experience as a practitioner. Approaches to art therapy, because of course I am an art therapist, and so as it is that we're working on that creativity, pulling together theory and practice of family therapy and counseling as a marriage and family therapist. And so growing and building upon those components. I also do, of course, trauma-informed interventions. That's a mainstay, using the AIP model and the principles and practices and bringing them all together to do with a modern psychoanalytic thought. And of course the systems of psychotherapy and as a trans-theoretical analysis. So we're building upon constructivist as well as existentialist theories as well. So as you can see, this is what it is that my counseling house looks like. And what I'm going to be asking you to do is to take some time and actually really create your own counseling house. What are the theories? What are the modalities that you want to build upon in a creative manner? It's our creativity that is our sense of play. And it's important for us to engage in whatever it is that might be for us in order to be able to maintain self-care. So, take some time, sit down, and actually really have a look at, well, what is it that are my predominant theories, my predominant modalities that I build upon and use within the therapy setting so that isomorphically you can actually really use them as it is that you begin your own self-supervision, self-reflective process.
All right. So we've been working on modalities, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about a specific case, and then we're going to be talking about you. So how about if we start with the creation of your counseling house based on the theories and modalities that you feel that you are building upon?
Okay.
How would that be?
Okay.
And I'll move this over a bit.
Do you want me to write them down?
Sure. Well, create your house.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Do I have an attic? Okay. So you want me to separate it into rooms?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I don't know how many there should be right now.
Well, you're building upon it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's really what's happening.
Yeah. I think recent discovery that I was using far more psychodynamic language and than I thought I was. So psychodynamic is huge. Some CBT would come in, but it's hard not to talk about thoughts and feelings, but I'm not much for like, we must change these. It's more awareness of them. So probably a little more in alignment with ACT, which is an extension of CBT anyways. So those are sort of combined. I'm doing a lot of reading on internal family systems.
Okay.
So parts. I really find I use parts language a lot, and it almost plays into ACT a little bit. Like there's a part of you
Right.
that feels
okay.
this way, which I find allows them that distance a little bit. There's a part of you who thinks this, a part of you who feels this, and I find that they're really complementary in that,
Oh, okay.
sort of that language. Or even in psychodynamic, there's a part of you that grew up believing. This sort of angle of why is this my core belief now? Well,
Right.
there was a part of you that,
Oh, okay.
for safety or whatever, to just help them sort of just see it as not so all encompassing, but a way to understand it a little bit better. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So based upon experiences and
Yeah.
context.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And accepting too that there's not this, their whole being doesn't have to change, but they can just work in little bits and pieces to make shift over time.
Right.
Deal with this one part of you. It doesn't feel so overwhelming to,
Right.
there's a lot of sort of those aha moments for a client when, I can say, when I'm reflecting back and I say, so there's a part of you that they seem to really resonate with that language, and I don't know whether it's the actual reflection or that I'm using those words. There's a part of you.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell.
It is,
but
yeah.
It seems to come out of my mouth a lot. So that's definitely a part of my house, right? For whatever reason. Yeah.
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 And then the acceptance of whatever it is that that's about, and the
Absolutely.
acceptance of where it is that you come from, whatever those experiences and contexts are.
Yeah. And I actually talk in, maybe I'll just draw a line in case there's more. Values then come in, right? So when there's a part of you, here's where it came from psychodynamically, potentially, here's some acceptance of it, but how, what's happening? How are you responding behaviorally in due to what these parts are saying to you?
Right.
And so, noticing it, accepting it, and then, well, let's look at, what are your values? Where, what, and that sort of all connects into what are your values and where did they come from? And how can we then act in alignment with our values to change the way we're behaving in response to these pieces. So I've been doing some just value exploration with some of my clients, and giving us sort of the tool to have a goal.
Oh, okay. Right.
Sort of behavioral goals. What can you change? Where's a little piece? Where can you take a little baby step forward?
Okay. In order to provide a sense of healing.
Yeah.
And what theories have you been exploring besides the modalities?
So what do you mean? Aren't they rooted in theory though?
They are, right?
Yeah. So psychoanalytic.
Yeah.
Right? This is almost, I wouldn't know how to say what theory this is. Internal family systems is a theory, right? It's rooted that, we have all of these parts and we have the exiles and the, internal family systems would be that theory. Acceptance and commitment comes from, it's actually like an extension of cognitive behavioral, right? It's, what do they call that? Third wave. Third wave.
Right, yes.
Yeah, and the values is tied in with
that.
With ACT, absolutely. That's where I've used a lot of the values have come from my research in ACT for sure. Yeah.
This is the, intersubjective that we were talking about, right? Which is context-based and experience-based, right? And then, the existentialists.
Yeah.
Which is to do with, being the same on the inside as what it is that's on the outside, right? And constructivists, meaning to construct.
Right.
Right? You're constructing or reconstructing the person in regards to whatever it is that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So, those are some.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I sort of... I don't often break it down. Like, where is this coming from theoretically, right? I don't. Yeah, I don't think to do that. But as soon as you said constructivism, I was like, yes, I loved that one in school. That we sort of construct our own world, and existential makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah.
For me, yeah.
It's a lot to do with mindfulness, really, when you think about it, because you're paying attention to the sensations, the feelings, the thoughts, right?
Yeah, that
and
sifting or SIBAM or those sort of what's happening for you. Yeah. Yeah, I do like body awareness stuff like polyvagal and somatic experiencing.
Well, there you go. Yeah,
those
exactly.
sorts of things. I'm not of the experience yet to begin to incorporate it, but I would love to.
Right.
Down the line, see how that fits into my house.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. So, still building.
Still building.
Absolutely. Still working on it. Exactly.
I feel like it'll be forever building. And like you've mentioned, sometimes, some of these rooms will change and I won't use these things anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just about knowing the language that you're using when it is that you're using it, right? When it is that you're bringing it in order for, just to know where it is that you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're doing therapy.
Yeah, it was so interesting that I didn't realize I was doing psychodynamics so often. Right?
Yeah.
It just sort of, intuitively you just speak with your client, you're there with them, and then the things come out. But you don't often view yourself in that way,
it's
right?
It's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all about it's all about the new.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about, whatever it is happening now. This is now it's all about trauma. Now it's, and it's so interesting, what is the actual real basis that we're building on? And when you take a look at it, there's just so many different components.
Yes.
Right? So that's all based there.
Yeah.
And then you're adding all these different components to it.
So I've recently come across the psychodynamic, interpersonal psychodynamic, which is like sort of focused on in relationship, which makes a lot of sense because we are all in relationship at all times.
Exactly.
Right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the dynamic between you, your client,
yeah.
right, and what's happening within that room.
Yeah.
And also to do with you and what's happening in supervision as well.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the relationships
Mm-hmm.
that are unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take this and take
Mm-hmm.
a look at your case,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
let's talk about a case.
Okay.
So what case are we talking about? Just make up a name.
Yep, we are talking about Lola.
Lola. Let's talk about Lola.
Okay,
Perfect. All right.
so okay, let's talk about Lola. So, she is experiencing a chosen disconnect from mom. It has from mom with realizations that mom and her's relationship wasn't healthy throughout
Okay.
her childhood. Something's up with mom. We could guess, but probably based on what client has shared, probably some narcissism, I would suspect. Some
Okay.
narcissistic tendencies. So Lola ended up being quite not allowed to share her emotions or have them. Emotions were not acceptable. And to stay in relation with mom, she had to be exactly what mom needed her to be in any given moment. So mom essentially controlled that relationship, but she was a child, so she didn't know any better.
Right.
And as soon as she experienced, Lola doesn't really know, but when mom experienced some sort of pushback from a friend, she just would tell her, that person's not in our life anymore. That family member's not in our life anymore. They're terrible, they're awful, whatever. So the family relationships got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
So relational cutoff.
Relational cutoff, including Lola's sister at some
Interesting.
point. And Lola believed the things her mom told her about her sister,
Interesting.
about all of sort of her family members, until it was just her and her mom, and then her grandparents, her mom's parents, left in her world. And Lola sort of experienced some pushback when she got married. It wasn't a traditional happy for you response. Maybe a little bit of competition,
Right,
feeling
right.
like I might be losing my daughter, which Lola always felt like she needed to take care of her mom in that way. Mom can't be alone New Year's Eve. Mom has no friends. I have responsibility for mom. I have to. Mom would call, and Lola might be, busy with her husband's family, and she'd like, you need to come right now, and Lola would go. That sort of situation of not feeling like she could make her own choices.
Interesting.
When she had children, mom wasn't traditionally excited about that, or supportive in those ways. So things eventually, after second child, came to a head, and she was like, you are no longer safe or healthy person in my life. So that came within the last year. So she's really exploring a lot of what happened. Why did I believe these things? Why didn't I see it? What is wrong with me? Self-esteem is super low.
Okay.
Self-image is really challenged. Sense of self is really something we're beginning to work on.
Oh, okay.
I'm encouraging her to sort of journal, and she's creative, so she does sketch journaling and
Okay.
artwork, and really discovering what it is she loves, because she's realizing a lot of the things that she loved or liked, or the furniture she had, all had something to do with her mom's influence, and never really coming from a place within her. So she's beginning to slowly evaluate, what is it that I like?
Interesting.
And that's been one of our interventions, is like slowly figure out, what are the things that you like, and what are the things that make you happy, and what are the things that are important to you, and those sorts of things we're working on.
Interesting. So it sounds like if you were to draw it sounds like from your description, Mom would be really big.
Mom would be really big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mom would be really big, and initially would have been like almost hovering right over her, but now she's sort of, there's a little bit more separation between them, is how I would sort of visualize that.
That's interesting. Well, how about if we draw that?
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah. That's quite the image.
Okay.
All
So I don't draw people very well, but I'll do my best.
Sure.
We're just going to go really basic. And then Mom would be big and probably dark. So I sort of see Mom as like surrounding her a little bit, this sort of image. I imagine sort of long hair floating over top of her.
Wow.
So that's how I would imagine it. Whereas that was original. So now I would say she's more, just a little bit more distanced from Mom. So Mom's sort of her own person now over here. And she can see that she's not, she's able to see now, okay, what's mine, what's hers. She's continually making that progress. I really find each week that I meet with her, she has a little bit more like, and also a little bit of frustration of, why does it always come back to her? Or, I want to move past her, but it keeps coming up.
Right.
And I just say, that's okay. It's okay if that's, if that's where it's coming back to, then we work through those things. So there's, more and more separation. And I sense her feeling a little bit more free to explore her own self.
Interesting. It's just interesting that you've drawn her still at the same size. Mom, yeah.
Funny, I always draw Mom as bigger. Yeah, because she's, a grown adult. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But how much of that is from me as a mother?
Well, and that's a really good question, right? Yeah.
It's just always, I think, once you're a mother, you're always a mother. You're always sort of that, want to protect them, even if you can't. So maybe I would always draw a mother and a daughter that way, potentially.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, and so let's come over here.
Okay.
And so talking about like family systems, because we're looking at your family system. You've come from somewhere, your experiences, right? Just like what it is that you're identifying there.
Yep.
When you think about where you've come from, right? What do you think about here?
What would I draw? Yeah, it's funny. I don't know how I would draw that. I'm less good about thinking sort of visually drawing with my hand than I am of like taking a photograph to represent what it is I'm feeling.
Well, you started with words.
Yes, I did. Yeah, words are much better for me. So, I grew up in a very loving and caring home with, I'd say, she also came from a split family. She remembers her dad sort of leaving, whereas my family is not split. And very egalitarian, if that's the word I'm thinking of. Like, my dad did a lot of stuff around the house, untraditionally in that age.
Oh,
So,
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I sort of have this vision of more equality in a relationship in terms of like daily little tasks and stuff. So yeah, so equality. My dad was the sewer of the family, right? Like the buttons and these sorts of things that are really unusual.
Okay.
So equality between parents. And then I was the youngest, but my sister is an introvert.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not. So I always say she never paved a road for me to get away with anything, you know. So I was really, I would say I'm black sheep is the impression I got. And my parents still to this day give me tons of love and support, but there were times that I felt like what I was doing wasn't okay, or the choices I'm making weren't okay. And what would other people think? What would the neighbors think? That sort of, so there was a little bit of, it matters what other people think.
Right.
But all in all, I mean, there was never anything that I felt like I missed or needed in growing up. When I feel like I had a really privileged house, you know. It was safe. I was taught to be independent, very independent, and female strong, I'd say. That was a really strong message in my house growing up.
Interesting.
Yeah, my grandmother raised my mom and her sister.
Okay.
In a time when you didn't leave your husband. So left an abusive husband, you know, in the mid 40s, and did it all on her own her entire life. So there was this ongoing story of be strong.
Be strong.
Be strong.
Stand on your own 2 feet.
Absolutely.
Sort of like a silo, more independent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so I don't even know how to draw that. I feel, yeah, I guess I'm kind of solo-ish. I have a hard time in relationships leaning in.
Oh,
right? Like, I've got this, I've got it, I'm good.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I can, but I don't know how that relates to my client, you know, and in who I am. I understand that, you know, family's optional, not you know what I mean? Like, relationships with family is optional. I have no judgment about her choice, whereas that is something she faces a lot. Mm-hmm. Oh, maybe someday you and your mom, and she's just like, why does everyone, you know, sort of undermine her in that way? But I don't have that feeling, even though I came from an intact family. I don't have a feeling that one is superior to the other.
Right. And yeah, interesting, when it was we were talking earlier, right? And your experience now is very different than this.
Very different.
Very different. And so when you look at your experience now, how would that change, or would it change? Would it be different? Would it be a different descriptive?
I'm still black sheep. I would say I'm still black sheep. Like, even the fact, there was, again, no judgment from my family, and very supportive in my separation from my husband. My family was super supportive in that choice. They were super supportive when I was grappling with, what am I doing to my kids? You know, there was nothing but support. But especially from my sister, I get black sheep a lot still.
Interesting.
Like sometimes you make really stupid choices, Trisha. You know, this sort of like, because it's so far from where her brain would be.
Oh, wow.
So I'd say I'm still black sheep. Female strong is something I'm almost trying to fight, because it's hard to process everything that happened if I don't lean in to it a little bit, right? If I pretend I'm okay. From the outside, I appear strong, but it's those strong ones that sometimes miss getting help because. So, trying to lean in.
Right.
Still an extrovert. Equality I'd like to see, but guys are guys. He was raised from a family where it was more traditional. Mom stayed home, didn't work, and so typically did the traditional mom role. So he learned less, but he's stretching and growing. My current partner, so I'd say, I feel. I mean, he doesn't sew, but so what? Those things, it doesn't matter what, he's stretching and growing. So growth for sure. And the goal is to keep on providing this supportive, loving, caring home.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very different, but it feels okay.
Okay.
I think there's moments of what did I do? I could have had this, but that's not reality. I didn't have that in my marriage prior, so but this one's big for me. It matters what others think. Maybe that's the connector, because that is something my client struggles with really hard. And I see that, I feel that whenever it comes up for her.
Yeah.
And I'm almost like, it's hard in those moments. You're like, I could have a conversation with this person as a person, and not as counselor client, because I get that, and I struggle with. That's my big one. It still matters what other people think. Like I'm getting to the point of processing through that and working through that, and that might be our connector, and that came from my mother. I would say more than anybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
And what would happen if, whatever it is, that people didn't think anything positive or whatever? Like you said about your sister. Why did you do that? The judgment.
Yeah, it's the judgment that really bothers me. Yeah, for a long time, I owned this black sheep. It's kind of like a piece of pride for me. Yeah, I am different from all of you. I'm super creative, and I'm weird, and I speak my mind, and I liked all those things about black sheep.
Like your client, super creative.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, maybe there's some connectors there. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it matters what I think. Yeah, it definitely comes with judgment, for sure. Not, that I'm not a good person, I guess, would probably come in there. That, choices. When you make a choice and other people get hurt, then that makes me overall not a good person versus a good person who made a bad choice, right?
Wow,
or
interesting. A bad person.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So I can get stuck in,
Okay.
people are judging me. I can certainly get hooked into what other people think.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Even though analytically I can see it, emotionally I can still get hooked.
So and when you were saying about mom, you're a mom.
Yeah.
So when you think about yourself as mom, right? Because this is what it is that your mom has given to you to carry with you. How would you describe yourself as mom?
I give them the opposite message.
Oh.
Yeah.
So as mom,
especially I have a child with social anxiety disorders. So, throughout her whole life, I have tried to be more a little bit out there in public so she could see it's a safe thing to do. Doesn't matter, just be who you are. You can do crazy things and nothing bad's going to happen. And so I really give the opposite message, right? Like
you give the black sheep message.
Yeah, I guess so. Or just being yourself message.
Right.
That it's safe to be who you are.
Right.
And it's, own all of the things about you. And I often say it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks.
Right. So safe to be who you are.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. And visually I don't know what that looks like. I think in photographs, not in drawing. It's really, really hard for me. I'm not really an artist in that sense. So I don't know what it means like in a fine art way to be safe to be who you are. I I can't draw that, but that's absolutely the message I try and give my kids, even though I struggle with it myself.
Yeah, interesting, eh?
Yeah, and I think that's how our own children can become really our great teachers.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
eh? Well, I mean, to be safe to be who you are would mean that you would be grounded,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
ground.
So I like the word rooted. So probably like tree, deeply rooted tree.
Okay.
Yeah. You know those trees that sort of are equal top bottom.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So
So
a deeply rooted tree.
yeah. So we're seeing like beneath the surface as well. So I'm a fan of what I call naked trees versus like in the fall, sort of the trees that you can see all of their bits and pieces. I mean, a leaved tree is beautiful, but there's something about these sort of trees without leaves, and you can see all of the branching. And same with the rooted bottom, which are a little bit more sort of squiggly, right? But and, yeah, rooted deeply in the ground, sort of that. I practice yoga a lot, and they talk about how a tree is meant to. It's deeply rooted, so that's when you're sort of rooting your feet on the ground, so that you can sway in the breeze and move through the storms, right? So yeah, something along those lines would feel good. Yeah, which maybe relates to sort of what I'd like to see happening for Lola is a rootedness in who she is, and a discovery of who she is, and then becoming really rooted in that. As an artist, as a fairly accomplished artist, according to feedback she's gotten over the years, she can't accept those ideas very well. She's talked about when people talk about her artwork and say it's good or something, she doesn't accept that very well. So even a simple sort of intervention, if you will, we practice is she almost doesn't believe them. Oh no. And so we've practiced. I just asked the question, what's something else you could say? And she was like, thank you. And I was like, yeah, just the baby step of owning that might be a
Very
really
good.
true part of herself. So
Very good. Interesting. Well, I mean, it is interesting, right? Because it sounds like what you're working on is her actually growing up,
yeah,
right?
absolutely, for sure.
Individuating,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, there was not a lot of individuation at all because it wasn't safe to be who she was. Certainly.
Whereas you're actually really working on maintaining connection. It sounds like, right, that you actually really want to do some leaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the opposite.
The opposite.
Yeah.
And just allowing that leaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really I allow my kids to lean into me, and they're really safe doing so. So it's like I can give myself to people to lean on, but I'm less apt to lean in when things get hard. I just sort of wall up and be like, I got this, because the only person I can rely on is me. That was sort of a message that came from my last marriage as well. I had to do it myself. So there was this already underlying, and then a 20-year relationship that taught me the only one I could really rely on was me. So there's some sort of added layers, but yeah, leaning into a partner specifically is the hardest part for me.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Wow. Very good.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When I think about Lola's husband, they have a really, really healthy relationship. And she specifically talks about choosing him for a reason, because he filled all of the places of her that were sort of empty. He was really safe. He really allows her to be her. He's the relationship and him has taught her a lot about herself. And is also like fills the attachment needs that she needed.
Right.
And she didn't know any of that. She just knew she chose him for a reason because he made her feel a certain way. But now she's able to sort of see that. And I feel like I've done that second time around because I you know, it's interesting that she is young and was able to do it at that time, because with someone with sort of insecure attachment and unmet attachment needs can often end up in a relationship that's just, you know, both insecure and conflict. But she found what she needed quite miraculously, I would suggest.
Yeah, recreating family of origin.
Yeah.
Right? So it sounds like a lot of what it is that relationship is reminds you of this here.
Yeah. Yeah, I would not have broken it down in that way. I've analyzed, am I sort of replacement mother for her in a sense, but I don't see myself as old enough to be her mom, but she may well see me as a mom. Yeah, which is interesting. I've tried to be like, I wonder, you know, who I am and what I am in this relationship for her. Am I picking up on transference? Is there transference? What does that look like?
Well, it sounds like what she's longing for is your descriptor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we've actually talked about the things she appreciates in people like her sister or other people she knows. When we sort of looked at her values, were they're direct and they just own their stuff, right? And she's amazed by that, because she's really like, oh, sorry, and I don't know, tentative about these pieces of her. So yeah, I mean, I stand hard in, you know, resolute in who I am.
Exactly. Interesting, eh? So it's almost like as if you're teaching her how to be a tree.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's interesting to do this with you, because it was only in the last few weeks that I was like, geez, like, all of my clients have a piece of them that I resonate with. And am I a lesson for them? Are they a lesson for me? Or is it both? And how does that work? Because as a photographer, for years I was a professional photographer, and I never had a nightmare bride. I had fantastic clients, a lot of them who I'm still friends with. And I knew then that they chose me for a reason. But when it comes to counseling, they're not seeing pictures that I've photographed and you know, emotions that I put out into the world photographically,
right,
like my other clients did. So how is this happening again, and yet they don't have any precursor to me,
right?
But it seems to be happening again, you know. It's very interesting.
It is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
for
that's sure.
Good. Well, when you do your self-portraits, then maybe you should do photography.
I started to.
Yeah
Okay, I've done a few self-portraits, and I was hoping that was okay, because it really speaks to me in a different way.
That's good.
Than actually having to draw it. I'm much better adept at, that's sort of my creative side, is seeing in images. So
that's perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's
fun.
the back and forth movement, right? It's and that it speaks, right? Whatever it is that your experiences are, and then actually really gaining an experience here as well as extolling, and you know, so it's that back and forth movement. Same with supervision, right? And then the idea of self-supervision is you're actually really doing this yourself, right? You're working your way through it in all of the different components with you, right? And that's the idea of the self-portrait,
right?
That dialogue. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's cool, because I've done a couple self-portraits, but this will change how I do them, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Perfect.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you.